You might remember in early 2018 I bought a Russian van. I was so happy, my first camper van. The mechanic who worked a month on it was laughing when I told him I'd take it around the world. At that moment I did not understand why. With Femke, you might remember her, she never really liked to be on camera. We built an interior in the van together with a guy that only spoke Russian, and I definitely do not speak any word Russian. 2 weeks later it was ready. Woohoo! I was so excited, our little house. And we adopted a puppy, Yippe. On our first trip I couldn't get it into four-wheel drive and I could barely come up the hill. Also I discovered a pretty big oil leak. Little Yippe kept the spirit up by jumping around me. Also the car didn't start well. I remember thinking I never had a car with this many problems in my life. But wait a moment, because that was only the beginning. It was time for Yippe's first time on the leash. He was becoming a little rebel. We continued in driving off-road in nature and again I could not get up a hill. But I learned that I needed to jam the four-wheel drive lever with a lot of force forwards and then it would work. Yippe was happy as always. Then I was telling you guys that Femke needed to go back to work, but actually I was telling you we were breaking up. But I wasn't so expressive at the time. I was alone on the road now. It was a very difficult time, but the van kept me entertained as the cables caught fire. This happened halfway up a hill and surprisingly I could roll down the hill all the way to a mechanic. It was fixed in no time. Yay! I felt a bit lonely, but Yippe kept me good company. Then we arrived at beautiful Songkul Lake. Would my mechanical issues finally be over? We drove back through some water, no problem, but on the way down the engine died. I couldn't figure out what it was. I was sick and tired of this van. A family stopped and the father, who didn't speak English, tried to help while his family went picnicking on the side of the road. I gave them some cookies. Then this man stopped who drove a similar van as me. Together they thought they found the issue, but they didn't. The problem seemed bigger and the van had to be towed 100 kilometers to the next town. The old man promises to pick me up the day after. My plan was to roll down the hill in the hope I would find a flat spot to camp. I had no engine power, so the brakes were really hard to use and I was hoping that it would work good enough so that it would not fly off a hill. We made it to a flat spot. Woohoo! There was no cell phone connection, so I was really hoping this man would come back the day after. And yes, a couple hours after he promised to come, he came. He would tow me to his house. His starter didn't work, so he used a handle to start his car, similar to an old airplane, which made me doubt about his car repair qualities. He had a bunch of sheep in his van. I thought it would take a day to fix it, but we spent 4 days taking apart the engine and fixing it. I was so done with this van. But every day I have breakfast, lunch and dinner with the family. That was such a nice experience. I still didn't speak any Russian, so we communicated with hand gestures. He charged me less than $100 for towing and 4 days fixing the van. Pretty amazing. The problem was that the oil stick for some reason wasn't too deep, so I would think the engine had enough oil, but actually only had half of what it needed. We were on the road again, finally. It took me about 2 days before my next electrical issue. But I had recently bought a lot of spare parts to prevent more breakdowns in the middle of nowhere and could fix this myself. Yippe was growing bigger and I started to wonder how big would he become, as I never saw his parents and I hoped he would not grow too big for the van. Then I met another couple who was driving in the same direction. It was cold. Yippe was cold. We decided to continue together. That was nice. I took a wrong turn, but according to Google Maps, this road would actually be a shortcut. It was very dusty. My engine died when my car was on a hill, but when I rolled it back to a level point, it started again. Then my four-wheel drive system broke. My friend with the Volkswagen pulled me out. Views were amazing. Then I couldn't make the turn of a narrow bend and couldn't reverse back as my four-wheel drive system was broken. So the wheel kept slipping and I ended up a few centimeters from, well, the end of my life. But the Volkswagen pulled me out. There was no one else on this road and you can see why. Then my friend almost lost his van and his own life. In the morning I was woken up by my van rocking from left to right, which was caused by cows grazing under my van. 3/4 on the road to our final destination, the road suddenly ended and we had to go the same way back. Yay. My friend got a flat tire. I got stuck in a river stream and stayed stuck for several hours until some guy showed up and helped pushing me out. Earlier I had tried to fix the four-wheel drive system, but then the guys arrived, pushed me out, and in a rush I did not put the protection cap back and continued driving. So when I got to the road, one of my four-wheel drive systems burned. I never put that in a YouTube video. as I just had too many breakdowns around that time to put in YouTube videos already. And also, the guy who helped me fix it way overcharged me. I learned once again to ask the price in advance. I was finally on the road again, but then a couple days later my electronic cable lit fire again. I put some fuses in, something the previous owner probably should have done, but then my headlights didn't work anymore. Luckily, I found a way to fix that too. I decided to put a Mercedes engine in, as I thought that would fix all my problems. Backpacker Ellie decided to join me, all excited, not knowing what van she would get herself into. We went on a hike and then some sheep herders' dogs attacked Jippe, but he made it out fine. We crossed the border from Kyrgyzstan to Tajikistan, and in the middle of the borders the fan of the new engine broke the antifreeze hoses and the engine heated up and we were stuck for 2 days in no man's land. It was freezing cold. But I managed to fix it. Yay! We went off-road driving, saw some amazing places. Driving back through deep water was again no problem, but then I drove over a rock that was a little too big and the bottom of my engine split open. I had the idea to fix it with 2-component glue and an empty can of beans. It worked. We found some people who gave us used oil because I didn't have enough and there were no shops. We experienced how the family lived and that was such an amazing experience. Then in the next town, while looking for a sleeping spot in a city, I drove in a hole in the road. I have no idea why there was a hole in the middle of the city and multiple things on my engine broke. I had to go on a car ambulance, which was definitely not made for the weight of my van. The driver was driving way too fast and I was afraid we'd fall over as I lied about the weight of my van, otherwise he would not have taken me. I'm not proud of it. His truck could carry 2 tons and I was more like 3. We made it safely though. Ellie went back home, which was always the plan but still felt like a big disappointment as I was alone again. I lived for a few weeks in the van at the mechanic shop. This was just exhausting. Finally, I could continue again. Somebody had given me an outdoor shower, but the second time I used it, it fell on the floor and broke. Also, then I had to go to a mechanic as when they put the Mercedes engine in, they forgot to put a few things back in the gearbox and it was leaking oil like crazy. I was living a couple weeks at the mechanic shop again. They had great food though. I could finally continue again and Jippe crossed his first bridge. I was proud. We continued to Kazakhstan and Jippe experienced his first snow. I did an Into the Wild thing. Then after visiting a nice place in nature, I couldn't find a road back and ended up driving through a river, which luckily did not give any issues. I saw some sheep crossing the road. Then the car stopped driving again, some issue with dirt in the fuel tank. Then, for once in my life, I saw other people with car problems. In Kazakhstan, I made a little documentary with a filmmaker. That was awesome, but at the same time about 5 mechanical and electric issues broke or stopped working on my van. I found a cheap house mechanic in Kazakhstan and we would work 2.5 months in -10 to -20 degrees on fixing my van. We rewired all the cables and took out all the unnecessary ones. We literally used the roof of the building to lift the van. Then we upgraded the axles, which would later break again. Jippe was still happy. I learned about how the gearbox worked. It was still freezing cold. Then on our test drive, all my injector pipes broke. Test drive was over and I continued on my way to Iran and met up with Alex, a good friend of mine in Uzbekistan, and spent New Year's together. I arrived in Iran and another injector pipe broke. I found a place that could custom make extra strong injector pipes and the problem seemed to be solved. Then a driver in front of me decided to put his car in reverse and drive against me. My first car accident while traveling. Not my fault, but I had to pay. Luckily only $25. Then on the way to the next town, my clutch pump broke and I couldn't drive anymore. Luckily I had a spare one with me and I could fix it myself. Jippe enjoyed the snow again on a hike. But on the way back, my steering system broke and it was freezing cold. After that, everything went fine for quite some time. But then my back axle broke and I had to drive 250 kilometers only on my front axle, which was half broken too, so I could only drive 20 kilometers per hour. I really thought that this was the end of my trip, as I knew these parts would not be available in Iran. Luckily, no Russian specific parts were broken and within a day it was fixed. Woohoo! Then after arriving in Pakistan, my front wheel almost flew off. I traveled with a friend who spoke Urdu that was very helpful in fixing it. We even were invited by a governor, probably the first Russian car ever in his place. That was cool. I was ready to go on my big North Pakistan trip. But then my axle started making noises again. I decided to replace it with Toyota axles and started my big trip. They didn't do a great job, so the steering connection to the axle broke within 2 days. Pretty dangerous as you suddenly lose the capability to steer the car. A small town fixed it within 2 hours and I could continue, but it broke again. But now I was in a big town. Here I made them fix it very strong. I continued and drove this amazing Jeep track. But then my diesel injector pump broke. I could only drive 5 minutes before the engine stopped and I had to wait 10 minutes before it would start again. It took me a whole day to drive 150 kilometers, but I made it back to the capital. I decided to switch to Toyota mechanics and rent a car and continue traveling instead of living at the mechanic shop for months again. I built a little house in this little van. This van never broke down. Actually, one time it didn't start on high altitude and somebody had to tow me to start it. And one time I got myself stuck as it was not a 4-wheel drive and a tractor had to pull me out. But that's it. Some months later my van was rebuilt to Toyota and I became good friends with the mechanic. We went hiking together. Then I put my van on a truck and drove to a seaport while sitting inside my van on the truck. I didn't drive myself as I was scared if I would drive those 2,000 kilometers, the van would break again as I had totally lost my faith in this van, even though it had new mechanics now. And my visa time was running out, so I didn't have time for another 2 months at a mechanic shop. A forklift truck then lifted me into this shipping container while I was sitting inside. I was so afraid it would fall, but it didn't. This is the end of this story and I went on the way to Argentina. And now we're driving from Argentina to Alaska on a $10 daily budget for food, fuel and things to do. $300 per month. If you like my videos, subscribe.